Back again, round two, you know. Round two. So what we're going to do is continue where we left off. Yes? That's what we're trying to do. So make sure you're acquainted with Kinahans. We're about to finish off what we started. So let's go back and hear this.
They believed Derek had already received warnings that his life was in danger. Despite that, the attackers still found the one moment he was exposed. Their escape followed a now familiar pattern. The gunman fled in a stolen Volkswagen Golf. Investigators soon established the killers had transferred into a second getaway vehicle, a Toyota Avensis, which was also abandoned and set on fire later that evening. The use of multiple escape vehicles highlighted just how carefully the operation had been planned. Detectives gathered CCTV from roads across the area, recovered forensic evidence from both burned vehicles, and examined every cartridge case, fingerprint, and trace of DNA. More than 400 lines of inquiry were eventually pursued. Despite years of investigation, nobody has been convicted of Derek's murder. For the Hutch family, it was another devastating loss. For investigators, it was further proof the feud remained active. And while the shootings continued in Dublin, attention was increasingly turning towards the man many believe sat at the center of the organization.
In 2016, Daniel Kinahan moved to Dubai. 2 years later, MTK moved its headquarters here too. The Irish police think the Kinahan family are now running their drug cartel from Dubai.
Daniel Kinahan had learned from the Regency Hotel attack. The days of public appearances, boxing weigh-ins, and moving freely through Spain were over. Investigators believed his life had changed completely. Every journey was planned, every meeting carefully controlled. Trusted associates created layers of protection between Daniel and almost everyone else. Another hidden detail. Detectives increasingly believed he rarely needed to give instructions face to face. The organization had evolved. Messages traveled through trusted intermediaries. Senior associates passed on orders. Those carrying out operations often never met the leadership directly. For investigators, that made proving criminal conspiracies far more difficult. While Gardai continued investigating shootings in Ireland, police in Spain, Britain, Belgium, the Netherlands, and other European countries were sharing intelligence on what they believed was one of the continent's largest organized crime groups. The investigation itself was changing. It was no longer focused solely on identifying gunmen. Detectives wanted to understand the organization behind them, how drugs moved across Europe, how money was laundered, who controlled the finances, and who ultimately gave the orders. For Daniel, life had become a contradiction. He was one of the best-known names in organized crime, yet investigators believed he had also become one of its hardest men to reach. The Regency attack hadn't killed him, but it had fundamentally changed the way he lived. The empire was still operating. The few feud was still claiming lives. The investigation was becoming increasingly international. Neither side fully realized it yet, but the pressure building through cooperation between law enforcement agencies.
I'm gonna pause again. That is crazy. That's the whole family.
Agencies across Europe would eventually become just as dangerous as the gunmen waiting on the streets. By 2018,
imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44,
the shootings attracted public attention, but behind the scenes, The business that had made the organization so powerful never stopped. For Daniel Kinahan's survival had changed everything. Before the Regency Hotel attack, he had attended boxing events, posed for photographs, met fighters and promoters openly. Now, those appearances had almost disappeared. Investigators believed that wasn't a sign of weakness. It was evidence that security had become tighter than ever. Daniel's movements were carefully planned. Meetings were tightly controlled. Trusted associates increasingly traveled on his behalf, allowing business to continue while keeping him out of reach. At the same time, the organization continued focusing on what investigators believed was its core business: international drug trafficking. According to law enforcement, the feud had done little to disrupt the flow of cocaine into Europe. Instead, the organization continued strengthening relationships with suppliers and criminal networks across multiple countries. It was an important distinction. While Dublin was consumed by shootings, investigators believed the real decisions, the logistics, and the money were increasingly being managed far from the streets where the violence was unfolding.
And the company was changing its name to MTK Global.
Meanwhile, MTK Global continued expanding. More fighters joined. New offices opened. The company established itself as one of boxing's fastest-growing management businesses. To the sporting world, it looked like a remarkable success story. To investigators, it represented something very different. They believed Daniel Kinahan had built a legitimate public profile alongside one of Europe's most powerful organized crime organizations. By the middle of 2018, the Kinahan organization had survived almost everything. Operation Shovel, years of surveillance, the Regency Hotel attack, the Hutch-Kinahan feud. Yet Daniel Kinahan remained free. To many, he appeared untouchable. Behind the scenes, investigators believed that was beginning to change. The biggest development wasn't another shooting. It was cooperation. Information that had once remained inside individual investigations was now being shared across borders. Drug seizures, financial records, travel patterns, company documents, encrypted communications, piece by piece.
Wow.
A larger picture was emerging. Investigators no longer believed dismantling the organization depended on intercepting individual drug shipments. Instead, they focused on mapping the entire network. Who organized transport? Who handled the finances? Who arranged meetings? Who protected the leadership? And who ultimately gave the orders? Daniel couldn't see every decision being made behind closed doors, but investigators thousands of miles apart were beginning to connect evidence gathered over many years. For the first time, the organization faced a challenge unlike any before. Not rival gangs, not a single police operation, but an international alliance determined to expose the empire piece by piece. And although it would take years, the foundations for that case were already being laid. By 2018, the Kinahan organization no longer resembled the group investigators had first encountered years earlier. It had evolved into a sophisticated international network, and so had the family leading it, Christy Kinahan, the founder. The man investigators believed had spent decades building the organization, had largely stepped back from its public face. He remained one of the most influential figures within the network. But detectives increasingly believed the day-to-day operation was being directed by his sons. The Kinahan organization had stayed one step ahead.
This is what I'm saying. Like, you can think about it is, I don't know how he's probably bigger than Escobar. He's the biggest thing going on. He's the biggest thing still. Pablo, Irish boy, but we don't know. Everything is alleged. It's not real. It's alleged. So I'm just getting you back into the story about this family. You know, it's alleged. You know, so he's back in.
Every time investigators closed in, it adapted. After Operation Shovel, the leadership became more secretive. After the Regency Hotel attack, Daniel's security tightened. When trusted associates were arrested, others stepped into their place. From the outside, the empire appeared almost impossible to dismantle. But hidden beneath that success was its greatest weakness. The organization had grown so large and stretched across so many countries that avoiding international attention had become impossible. This was no longer an Irish investigation or a Spanish one. Police forces across Europe were beginning to connect intelligence that had once seemed unrelated. Drug seizures, financial investigations, encrypted communications, shipping routes, money movements. Each piece of evidence pointed towards the same organization. Another overlooked detail. The Kinahans built their strength by operating across borders, but that same international reach created new opportunities for investigators. A breakthrough in one country could unlock evidence in another. The network that had protected the organization for years was slowly becoming its greatest vulnerability. Meanwhile, Daniel remained largely out of public view. Christie continued to keep a low profile. Christopher Jr. was increasingly regarded by investigators as another key figure within the organization. From the outside, the family still appeared united, still powerful, still untouchable. But appearances can be misleading. For years, their greatest threat had come from rival criminals. Now, it came from something far more patient. An international alliance of law enforcement agencies, quietly building a case that reached far beyond any single murder. The pressure wasn't arriving in one dramatic raid. It was building piece by piece. And before long, events far beyond Ireland would begin reshaping the future of the Kinahan organization. In 2020, Christopher Jr. was stopped by German authorities at Frankfurt Airport after arriving from Dubai using a fraudulently obtained Irish passport. The passport had been issued in the name of Martin O'Rourke. It was a name with a chilling history. Martin O'Rourke, an innocent father of 3, had been murdered in Dublin in 2016 after being mistaken for another man during the Hutch-Kinahan feud. German authorities detained Christopher Jr. and seized the passport. But after convincing officers he was the man named on the document, he was released and allowed to continue his journey. For investigators, the incident highlighted how far senior members of the organization were allegedly willing to go to conceal their identities and movements across Europe. Then, something happened investigators had hoped for. For years, encrypted communication platforms, long trusted by organized crime groups across Europe, were beginning to fail. Criminals believed they were communicating in complete secrecy. They weren't. Without realizing it, some of Europe's most powerful organized crime groups were leaving behind a digital trail. The Kinahans didn't yet know it, but the balance was beginning to change. They had stayed one step ahead. Now, for the first time, law enforcement was beginning to catch up, and what investigators uncovered over the next 2 years would change the future of the Kinahan organization forever. The Kinahans had relied on secrecy, trusted couriers, face-to-face meetings, encrypted mobile phones. Investigators believed those phones were one of the organization's greatest strengths. The people using them believed their conversations could never be read. They were wrong. Across Europe, law enforcement agencies achieved something that had once seemed impossible. Encrypted communication platforms used by organized crime groups were compromised. Suddenly, investigators weren't just watching suspected criminals. They were reading conversations, following plans, mapping relationships, and connecting people who had spent years trying to remain invisible. This wasn't only a breakthrough for Irish investigators. Police forces across Europe were now comparing intelligence in real time. A message recovered in one country could explain a drug seizure in another. A phone linked to one investigation could unlock another hundreds of miles away. For detectives investigating the Kinahans, it changed the scale of the investigation.
Just be good, man.
They no longer had to rely solely on surveillance, witness statements, or burnt-out getaway cars. They were beginning to understand how organized crime groups communicated, how they moved money, and how they coordinated international operations. Meanwhile, the organization still projected strength. The family still appeared beyond the reach of Irish law enforcement, but appearances were becoming increasingly misleading. The evidence wasn't arriving all at once. It was arriving message by message, phone by phone, investigation by investigation. The empire had spent decades expanding across Europe. Now, European investigators were slowly piecing that empire back together, and although the Kinahans couldn't yet see the full picture, the next 2 years would bring the greatest international pressure the family had ever faced.
They all, moved away from Amsterdam into Spain and then later on into Dubai. They evolved from local players to this really big international business, what, is now known as the super cartel.
The encrypted phones had given investigators a new way into Europe's criminal networks. But in 2021, Daniel Kinahan was facing pressure somewhere far more public: professional boxing. Daniel had insisted his work in the sport was separate from the criminal organization investigators linked him to. MTK Global had also maintained that he was no longer involved with the company he helped create, but Daniel had never truly disappeared from boxing.
Do not pay somebody to build you a Shopify store, because I'm going to do it free with 20 handpicked products by myself and my expert team and professionally written ad copy for all of those products at no charge. And if you don't believe me, I dare you to click on this ad, go to the next page, and see if I ask you for a single penny. And I'm doing this because I am a Shopify partner and an endorsed commerce coach by their platform, and they're actually going to pay me to build your store for you if you like your store and you actually keep it. And if you don't believe me, again, I'm going to share my screen right now, and I'm going to show you how my software will build your store for you at no cost, as long as you take care of setting up your Shopify plan. All right, check this out. This is a quick example of what the store looks like. So you'll be able to have a top banner. You'll be able to have different products that are located on the store that we hand select for you. They're all drop ship products. And we're also going to have professionally written ad copy on this custom store for you. Now, you can build this in about 15 minutes using our completely free Ecom Express app. So here's the thing, all right? I'm about to show you the app, but in this video somewhere, there's a link you can click and you can get your very own Shopify store built by us completely free with 20 products. And you're gonna go to this app right here.
In February 2021, he publicly confirmed he was still advising fighters.
Let's
The
get busy.
admission came at the worst possible moment. A major BBC investigation was examining his influence within the sport, the fighters around him, and the contrast between the successful boxing advisor seen in Dubai and the man Irish courts and law enforcement had identified as a senior figure in organized crime. The program brought Daniel's name into homes far beyond Ireland. Viewers who knew nothing about the feud, Operation Shovel, or the Kinahan organization were suddenly being shown how deeply he had become involved in professional boxing. Then came another disturbing detail. Members of the BBC team involved in the investigation received threats. Security around the journalist was increased. The story was no longer simply about boxing. It was about the risks faced by those who examined Daniel's influence too closely. Yet Daniel did not retreat. He continued advising fighters, speaking publicly, and presenting himself as a legitimate businessman who had never been convicted of the major organized crime offenses linked to his name. That contrast had always been one of his greatest protections. To investigators, he was the operational leader of an international organized crime group. To parts of the boxing world, he remained a trusted advisor capable of arranging some of the biggest fights in the sport. And MTK's ambitions were still growing. Promoters knew him. Champions spoke to him. Some of boxing's biggest fights had his fingerprints all over them. It had taken years.
Yeah, mate.
Years to build, only days to begin falling apart. As governments and investigators increased their focus on the Kinahan organization, the boxing world found itself under the spotlight. Questions that had been avoided for years could no longer be ignored. Promoters were asked who they worked with. Managers were forced to explain their relationships. Broadcasters came under pressure. Fighters suddenly found themselves answering questions that had nothing to do with boxing. Companies began asking a simple question. Could they afford to remain associated with Daniel Kinahan, for Christie, and Christopher Jr.? The consequences reached far beyond boxing. Banks, businesses, and international partners were becoming increasingly cautious. The Kinahan name itself was becoming a liability. Then, everything accelerated. One promoter after another began distancing themselves. Business relationships that had taken years to build started disappearing within days.
We had a situation last week when the US authorities announced that Daniel Kinahan was sanctioned. What was your relationship with him, and what's your relationship going to be going forward?
I've just had a million questions about all this rubbish before, but like I said to them, it's none of my business, and I don't get involved in other people's business, so it doesn't really concern me.
The Kinahans had survived for more than 20 years. Raids, gang wars, international investigations. Nothing had truly isolated the family. Then, on April 12th, 2022, everything changed. Inside Dublin's City Hall, journalists from across Ireland and around the world gathered. Most expected another organised crime press conference. What they witnessed was something completely different.
Did you know you can get a .co.uk domain completely free? With names.co.uk, you can secure your domain name in minutes. Search for the name you want, choose an available .co.uk and register it completely free for a year. And free means free, no other purchase is needed. Co.uk domains are trusted, recognisable and perfect for UK websites.
Standing beside senior Garda officers were representatives of the United States government. The message was clear. The Kinahan organisation was no longer being treated as Ireland's problem. It had become an international one. For the first time, Christy Kinahan, Daniel Kinahan, and Christopher Jr. were publicly named together by the United States as the leaders of a major transnational organised crime group. Then came the announcement that stunned everyone. A reward of up to $5 million for information leading to the arrest or conviction of each of the three men. Not $5 million altogether. $5 million for Christie, $5 million for Daniel, $5 million for Christopher Jr., $15 million in total. The United States didn't simply announce sanctions. Officials released extraordinary detail about the organization. Businesses, associates, aliases, addresses, companies investigators believed were connected to the family. It was a message to the world. The impact was immediate. Banks became cautious. Business partners stepped away. Anyone connected to the family suddenly faced questions they had never been asked before. For Daniel, the timing could hardly have been worse. Years spent building influence inside professional boxing were about to unravel. The walls the family had spent decades building were beginning to crack. The Kinahans were still free, still living in Dubai, but something had fundamentally changed. For years, the family had fought rival gangs. Now, they were fighting governments, and governments had far greater resources, far longer memories, and far more patience than any rival criminal organisation.
As Jonathan Dowdall arrived to the criminal courts of justice under armed escort this morning. Shortly after 11:30, he was led into courtroom 17, taking a seat in the jury box directly across from murder-accused Jerry the Monk Hutch.
As the Kinahans faced the fallout from the $15 million bounty placed on their heads, The Regency Hotel attack from 2016 was finally catching up with their longtime rival, Gerry Hutch. In 2022, Gerry Hutch stood trial before Ireland's Special Criminal Court, charged with the murder of David Byrne during the Regency Hotel attack. The prosecution alleged Hutch was one of the gunmen involved in the attack. A key part of the prosecution's case relied on the evidence of Jonathan Dowdall, who told the court Gerry Hutch had admitted taking part in the shooting. The judges also heard CCTV evidence, phone records, forensic evidence, and testimony from multiple witnesses gathered during the investigation. After a trial lasting several months, the three-judge court retired to consider its verdict. Then, on the 17th of April 2023, Gerry Hutch was found not guilty of the murder of David Byrne. The court ruled that the prosecution had failed to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. The judges concluded they could not safely rely on Jonathan Dowdall's evidence without sufficient independent corroboration. But as Gerry Hutch walked free, the pressure on the Kinahans was only continuing to build. The sanctions were only the beginning. Within days, the fallout spread across the boxing world. MTK Global, one of the biggest management companies in professional boxing, announced it would cease operations. The company had represented world champions, promoted major events across the globe, and built one of boxing's largest management networks. Now, it was over. The sanctions didn't need to put the Kinahans behind bars to hurt them. They targeted something far more valuable: their ability to operate openly. For years, the family had been accused of hiding behind legitimate businesses. Now, those businesses were becoming liabilities instead of protection. Meanwhile, the investigation didn't stop. Irish detectives continued working alongside the DEA, the UK's National Crime Agency, Europol, and police forces across Europe. Financial investigators traced money. Analysts mapped relationships. Every new arrest of an associate, every seized encrypted device, and every international drug investigation added another piece to the picture investigators believed they had been building for years. None of the three had been arrested, but they were no longer operating in the shadows. Their names had become known around the world. The family that had once avoided publicity was now the subject of international headlines. For investigators, that visibility mattered, because every public appearance, every business connection, and every financial movement would now receive a level of scrutiny the family had never faced before. The Kinahans had spent decades building one of Europe's most powerful organized crime organizations. Now, the question was no longer whether investigators knew who they were. It was whether the pressure would ever be enough to bring them to justice.
For just $67, you can generate as many videos as you want and never have to worry about showing your face on camera or using complex editing tools. With only a few clicks with Toonbee, you can generate a high-converting video, just like the one you're watching right now.
But instead of telling you about how amazing Toonbee really is, why don't I just show you? Let's say we want a bee explaining the law of gravity.
And after years of investigations, that question would finally begin to receive an answer.
Daniel Kinahan, one of the leaders of an international organised crime group, has been arrested in the United Arab Emirates. Mr. Kinahan, who's in his 40s, was detained on foot of an arrest warrant issued by the Irish courts in relation to alleged serious organised crime offences. Dubai police said the arrest took place on the 15th of April.
For over a decade, people had asked the same question. Would Daniel Kinahan ever be arrested? For a long time, the answer appeared to be no. Then, in April 2026, the moment many believed would never come finally arrived. Daniel Kinahan was arrested in Dubai. The man who had spent years staying one step ahead was finally in custody. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was the moment that proved no empire lasts forever. Daniel's arrest changed everything. For the first time, the Kinahan family had been split. Daniel, the man investigators believed had become the operational leader of the organization, was in custody in Dubai, fighting extradition back to Ireland. Investigations into both Christie and Christopher Jr. continue. Irish authorities have repeatedly made it clear that Daniel's arrest was not the end of the investigation. Their focus remains on the entire organization. Christie created it. Daniel expanded it. Christopher Jr. helped sustain it. For a long time, they appeared untouchable. But history has a way of changing. Whether Daniel is ultimately extradited, whether Christie or Christopher Jr. ever face charges, and whether the organization truly disappears, will be decided in the years ahead. But one thing is already certain. The Kinahans changed the face of organized crime in Ireland forever.
Whether Daniel is ultimately extradited, whether Christie or Christopher Jr. ever face charges, and whether the organization truly disappears, will be decided in the years ahead. But one thing is already certain. The Kinahans changed the face of organized crime in Ireland.
The Hennessy name was never meant to be whispered in fear, never meant to be written in the annals of Ireland's most notorious gangland, was not born into the underworld, nor...
That was the end of part 2. Disclaimer and all of that. Everything there was alleged till it's proven, you know, so this is what we're doing. You understand? All of that. You understand? So we're here to say follow MJ's Entertainment, follow the vibes, get me, like, subscribe. That was the Kinahans, and that's probably going to be the biggest court case going on probably for the next 5 to 10 years. You understand? Is allegedly, we don't say we can't, or you understand, till you, I don't know, what is it, till you proven guilty? Well, you know what I'm saying. Alright, cool. Follow MJ Entertainment. This is how they, you understand, they were enjoying Christmas still. Yeah? Alright, cool. Stop.